The dust rose in small clouds around Sarah Jane's worn boots as she laid out the last of the tools on the makeshift table outside her tiny cabin, knowing that selling her husband's possessions meant accepting a truth she had fought against for 3 long months. The Wyoming sun beat down mercilessly on Grass Valley that September morning in 1876, turning the already parched earth into something that cracked and groaned beneath every footfall. Sarah wiped her brow with the back of her hand, leaving a streak of dirt across her temple as she arranged the hammers, saws, and chisels with trembling fingers. Each tool represented a memory of Thomas, her husband of 4 years who had been thrown from a spooked horse and never woken up. He had been 32, she was 24, and now she was alone with debts she could not pay and a future that looked as barren as the landscape around her. The cabin they had built together sat behind her, small and sturdy with its rough-hewn logs and single-glass window that Thomas had been so proud of. That window had cost them dearly, hauled all the way from Cheyenne, but he had wanted Sarah to have light while she worked inside. Now that light only illuminated her loneliness. She had set up her table at the edge of the main road running through Grass Valley, hoping to catch the attention of travelers and townspeople alike. The town itself was modest, consisting of a general store, a saloon, a church that doubled as a schoolhouse, and perhaps 20 scattered homes and cabins. Most people made their living from ranching or farming, fighting against the harsh Wyoming climate and hoping each year would be kinder than the last. Sarah had pinned a hand-lettered sign to the table that read, "Tools for sale, good condition." Her handwriting was neat despite her lack of formal education, learned painstakingly from Thomas during their brief marriage. He had been a patient teacher, tracing letters in the dirt when they were courting, writing words on scraps of paper once they wed. The memory of his calloused finger guiding her hand made her throat tighten. Several people had stopped by already that morning. Old Mr. Peterson had looked over a level and muttered something about not needing another one before shuffling away. Mrs. Chen, who ran the general store with her husband, had offered condolences but no money. A young man barely old enough to shave had picked up a handsaw, tested its edge, then set it down with a shake of his head when Sarah named her price. She was beginning to think the day would end with her possessions still her own, and her debt still unpaid, when she heard the sound of hoofbeats approaching from the west. Sarah looked up to see a man riding a large roan gelding, sitting tall in the saddle with the easy posture of someone who had spent more time on horseback than on foot. He wore a dusty brown hat pulled low against the sun, and even from a distance she could see the glint of silver conchos on his saddle. The rider slowed as he neared her table, his eyes scanning the tools laid out before him. He dismounted in one smooth motion, looping his reins over a nearby post that Thomas had set there for exactly this purpose. As he approached, Sarah got her first good look at him. He was tall, perhaps in his late 20s, with sun-darkened skin and eyes the color of summer grass. His jaw was strong and covered with several days' worth of stubble, and there was a seriousness to his expression that made him seem older than his years. "Afternoon, madam," he said, tipping his hat. His voice was deep and carried a hint of something Sarah could not quite place, an accent softened by years but not entirely gone. "These tools for sale?" "Yes, sir," Sarah replied, straightening her shoulders despite the exhaustion that pulled at her bones. "All in good working order. My husband was particular about maintaining his equipment." The man nodded and began examining the tools one by one, testing the weight of each hammer, checking the sharpness of every blade, running his thumb along the smooth handles worn by use. He worked methodically and in silence, and Sarah found herself studying him in return. There was a competence in his movements, a knowledge that came from experience rather than pretension. His hands were scarred and calloused, the hands of a working man. "You said these were your husband's," he said after several minutes, not looking up from the plane he was examining. It was not quite a question. "Yes, sir. He passed 3 months back." Now the man did look up, meeting her eyes directly. His gaze was steady and filled with something that might have been sympathy but was tempered with understanding rather than pity. "I am sorry for your loss. That is a heavy burden to carry." Sarah nodded, not trusting her voice. "How much do you want for the lot?" The question surprised her. All of it," he confirmed. "I am starting a ranch about 5 miles north of here, building everything from scratch. I need tools, and these are well made and well maintained." "How much?" Sarah's mind raced. She had priced each tool individually, hoping to sell them piece by piece over time. The total would be substantial, more money than she had seen in one place since Thomas died. But she was also aware that desperation could be read on her face like words on a page, and she feared naming a price too high and watching this man walk away. $200, she said, her voice steadier than she felt. It was more than fair, actually less than the tools were worth, but it would pay her debts and leave enough for supplies to see her through the winter. The man did not blink, did not negotiate. "Fair price," he said. He reached into his vest pocket and pulled out a leather wallet, counting out bills with the careful attention of someone who knew the value of money, but was not afraid to spend it when the purchase was worthwhile. He handed the bills to Sarah, and she took them with shaking hands. "Thank you," she managed. "I am the one who should be thanking you." He began gathering the tools, loading them into a canvas sack he pulled from his saddlebag. As he worked, he glanced at the cabin behind her, taking in its condition with the same assessing gaze he had used on the tools. Then his eyes returned to her face, studying her with an intensity that made her want to look away but somehow could not. "Can I ask you something, madam?" Sarah Jensen. "Robert Irving," he said, tipping his hat again. "Can I ask you something, Sarah?" She nodded. "What are your plans now? Do you have family in the area?" The question was direct, perhaps too direct by some standards, but Sarah found she did not mind it. There was no inappropriate curiosity in his tone, only practical concern. "No family," she admitted. "My parents died of fever when I was young. Thomas was all I had. I suppose I will need to find work, though opportunities are scarce for women in Grass Valley." Robert was quiet for a moment, his hand resting on a hammer he had just packed away. When he spoke again, his words came slowly, as if he was considering each one carefully. "I find myself in need of help at my ranch. The work would be hard, building a place from nothing, but I can offer fair wages and a safe place to stay. I am building a bunkhouse for hired help, separate from the main house. It would be proper and respectable." Sarah stared at him, certain she had misheard. "You want to hire me?" "I do. I have been doing the work alone, but there is too much for one man. I need someone who can handle the daily tasks, cooking, tending to animals we will acquire, helping with construction where possible, managing supplies. You look like someone who knows hard work and is not afraid of it." It was true that Sarah had never shied from labor. She had worked alongside Thomas on their small plot, hauling water, tending their garden, chopping wood, and managing their 2 goats and handful of chickens. Her hands bore the evidence of that work, calloused and strong despite their slender appearance. "I do not know what to say," she admitted. "Say yes," Robert replied simply. "Unless you have better prospects." She did not, and they both knew it. A woman alone in Grass Valley had few options. She could try to find work as a washerwoman or perhaps cleaning at the saloon. though that latter option came with implications she wanted no part of. She could attempt to sell the cabin and land, but that would take time she did not have, and the market was not favorable. Or she could accept this stranger's offer and take a chance on something unknown. "I will need to think about it," she said, though her heart was already leaning toward acceptance. "Of course." Robert finished packing the tools and secured them to his horse. "I will be staying at the boarding house tonight, leaving tomorrow morning. If you decide yes, meet me here at dawn. If not, I will understand and wish you well." He mounted his horse with the same easy grace he had shown dismounting, settling into the saddle as if he belonged there. Before he rode away, he touched the brim of his hat once more. "I hope to see you tomorrow, Sarah Jensen." Then he was gone, riding back toward the center of town, leaving Sarah standing alone with $200 clutched in her hands and a decision weighing on her mind. That evening, Sarah sat in her cabin counting and recounting the money, separating it into piles. One pile for her immediate debts, the money she owed to the general store and to the doctor who had tried to save Thomas. Another pile for winter supplies, flour, beans, salt, lamp oil, firewood if she could not chop enough herself. The remaining pile was pitifully small, barely enough to see her through to spring, and that was assuming nothing went wrong, no illness, no damage to the cabin, no unexpected expenses. She looked around the small space that had been her home, seeing it now with clearer eyes. The roof leaked in 2 places, patched temporarily but needing real repair before the snow came. One wall had a draft that no amount of stuffing with cloth seemed to fix. The stove worked, but was old and temperamental, and she lived in constant fear of it giving out entirely. Even if she could manage to survive the winter here alone, what then? She had no way to earn a steady income, no skills that anyone in Grass Valley needed enough to pay for. Thomas had planned to expand their small farm, to buy more land and livestock, to build something lasting. Those dreams had died with him, and Sarah was practical enough to know she could not resurrect them on her own. The tools she had just sold had been the last valuable item she possessed. After this, there was nothing left to sell but the cabin itself. The more she thought about it, the more Robert Irving's offer seemed less like a choice and more like a lifeline. But taking it meant leaving the home she had shared with Thomas, leaving the grave where he was buried under a simple wooden cross on the hill behind the cabin. It meant trusting a stranger, riding off to an isolated ranch with a man she had met only hours before. Every cautious instinct she possessed warned against it. Yet there had been something in Robert's eyes, a straightforward honesty that was rare in Sarah's experience. He had not looked at her with pity or with the calculating interest some men showed when they saw a vulnerable woman. He had looked at her as he looked at the tools, assessing her value not in terms of exploitation, but in terms of capability. He had offered her work, not charity, and he had been careful to mention the separate bunkhouse, understanding without being told that her reputation and safety mattered. Sarah made her decision somewhere in the dark hours before dawn, when the cabin felt most empty and the future most uncertain. She would go. She would take this chance because staying meant a slow slide into desperation, and she had too much of Thomas's stubborn determination in her to accept that fate without a fight. As the first gray light crept over the horizon, Sarah packed her belongings. She did not own much. 2 changes of clothes, both patched and worn, a few cooking implements, a quilt her mother had made, Thomas's Bible with their marriage recorded in the front, a small daguerreotype of the 2 of them taken in Cheyenne on their wedding day. Everything fit into a single trunk and a canvas bag. She walked through the cabin one last time, running her hand along the table Thomas had built, touching the mantel above the stove where they had planned to display treasures they would acquire over their years together. She said goodbye to the space that held so many memories, then locked the door and walked away. Robert was already waiting at the spot where she had set up her table the day before. He sat on his horse with a packhorse tied behind, the animal laden with the tools he had purchased and additional supplies. When he saw Sarah approaching with her trunk and bag, something that might have been relief crossed his face. "I hoped you would come," he said simply. "I am not much for hoping," Sarah replied, "but I am good at working. I will earn my wages, Mr. Irving." "Robert," he corrected, "and I have no doubt of that. Let me help you with your things." He dismounted and secured her trunk to the packhorse with practiced efficiency, then helped her mount his own horse before swinging up behind her. Sarah stiffened at the proximity, conscious of his chest against her back, his arms on either side of her as he held the reins. But his posture was respectful, leaving as much space between them as was practical. 5 miles north," he said. "We will be there by mid-morning." They rode out of Grass Valley as the sun climbed higher, painting the Wyoming landscape in shades of gold and brown. The land was harsh but beautiful in its own way, vast and empty under an endless sky. Sarah had lived in this territory her entire life and still felt small beneath that sky, a tiny figure in an immense and indifferent world. Robert did not try to fill the silence with meaningless conversation, for which Sarah was grateful. She was not ready for idle chatter, not ready to pretend at ease she did not feel. Instead, they rode in quiet broken only by the sound of hoofbeats and the occasional call of a hawk overhead. After about an hour, Robert spoke. "I should tell you about the ranch so you know what you are getting into. I bought the land 2 months ago, 640 acres. There is water, a creek that runs year-round and good grazing. I have been living in a tent while I build the main house. The frame is up, walls are nearly complete, but the interior needs finishing. I plan to bring in cattle next spring, start with a small herd and build from there." "That sounds ambitious," Sarah said. "It is. But I have been working toward this for 10 years, saving every dollar I earned working other men's ranches. I am ready to build something of my own." "Where are you from originally?" Sarah asked, picking up on that slight accent she had noticed before. "Ireland," Robert said. "Came over when I was 17 with my brother. He went east to find work in the factories. I came west because I wanted land and open space. We write when we can, but I have not seen him in years." "Do you miss it, Ireland?" Robert was quiet for a moment. "I miss my family, my mother, my sisters." But Ireland had nothing for men like me, younger sons with no inheritance and no prospects. America has been good to me. Wyoming has been good to me. This land is hard but honest. You know where you stand." Sarah understood that sentiment. Wyoming demanded much but hid nothing. There was a brutal clarity to life here that suited certain temperaments. As they rode, the landscape gradually changed. The flat plains gave way to gentle rises and eventually to a valley carved by a creek that sparkled in the morning light. Trees grew along the water's edge, cottonwoods and willows that provided blessed shade. The grass here was better than in Grass Valley, thick enough to feed a substantial herd. "There," Robert said, pointing ahead. Sarah looked and saw what would become a ranch. The house sat on a rise overlooking the creek, its wooden frame stark against the sky. As they drew closer, she could see that Robert had not exaggerated the progress. The basic structure was indeed complete, walls up, roof on, but the interior was clearly unfinished. Nearby sat a large tent that must have served as Robert's home, and beyond that, stacks of lumber and supplies covered with canvas tarps. Robert guided the horse to a flat area near the tent and dismounted, then helped Sarah down. Her legs were unsteady after the ride, and his hand on her arm was steadying. "Welcome to the Irving Ranch," he said with a slight smile, the first she had seen from him. It transformed his serious face, making him look younger and less careworn. Sarah looked around, taking in the scope of what Robert was attempting. Building a ranch from nothing was audacious, requiring not just money and labor but vision and determination. She felt a flicker of something she had not experienced in months, not quite hope but perhaps its precursor, the sense that forward motion was possible. "Where do you want me to start?" she asked. Over the following days, Sarah discovered that Robert had not exaggerated the amount of work to be done. She also discovered that he had not exaggerated his promise of fair treatment. He showed her to the tent, which he insisted she take while he slept in the partially completed house, despite the lack of interior walls or proper doors. He gave her a full accounting of what he could pay, $25 a month plus room and board, and asked for her input on prioritizing tasks. Sarah threw herself into the work with an intensity that surprised them both. She woke before dawn to make coffee and breakfast, strong coffee and johnnycakes or beans, whatever supplies they had on hand. Then she worked alongside Robert on whatever task demanded attention that day. She learned to mix mortar and stack stones for the foundation of what would become the bunkhouse. She helped raise beams, holding them steady while Robert secured them in place. She hauled water from the creek, carried lumber, cleared brush, and did 100 other tasks that left her exhausted but satisfied at the end of each day. In the evenings, after a simple dinner, they would sit by the fire and Robert would talk about his plans for the ranch. He wanted to build a reputation for quality cattle, to be known as a fair dealer, to create something that would last. Sarah found herself drawn into his vision, offering suggestions born from her own experience of frontier life. She knew which merchants in the surrounding towns were honest, which trails were passable in different seasons, how to stretch supplies and make do with less. "You have a head for this," Robert said one night, perhaps 2 weeks after Sarah had arrived. They were sitting by the fire, the autumn air turning cold enough that the warmth was necessary. "You see things practically. Thomas used to say I could squeeze a penny until it screamed," Sarah said, then felt her throat tighten at the mention of her husband's name. It was the first time she had spoken of him to Robert. Robert did not offer empty platitudes. Instead, he said, "He taught you well. That kind of practical thinking will make the difference between a ranch that succeeds and one that fails." As the weeks passed and September turned to October, Sarah felt something shifting inside her. The raw grief that had consumed her began to transform into something more bearable, a permanent sorrow rather than an acute pain. She still thought of Thomas every day, still felt his absence like a missing limb, but she could also see a path forward now. The work helped, giving her purpose and exhausting her body so completely that sleep came without the hours of wakeful mourning she had endured in the cabin. Robert helped too, though she did not think he knew it. His steady presence, his calm competence, and his respectful distance all created a space where Sarah could begin to heal. He never pushed her to talk about her loss, never made her feel as though her grief was inconvenient or excessive. He simply treated her as a valued colleague, someone whose opinions mattered and whose work was essential. She began to notice things about him, small details that accumulated over days of working in close proximity. The way he was always careful to take the heavier end of any load they carried together. How he never raised his voice, even when something went wrong. The gentleness with which he treated the horses, his voice low and soothing as he brushed them down each evening. The fact that he always served her food before taking his own portion, an old-fashioned courtesy that spoke of how he had been raised. She noticed, too, that he was handsome, though this observation came almost clinically at first, an acknowledgement of fact rather than a stirring of feeling. But gradually, perhaps inevitably, it became more than that. She found her eyes drawn to the way his muscles moved beneath his shirt when he lifted heavy beams. She became aware of the sound of his voice, the slight lilt that emerged when he was tired and his careful American pronunciation slipped. She noticed the rare smiles he gave, how they lit his eyes before reaching his mouth. Sarah tried not to think about what these observations meant. It felt like a betrayal of Thomas's memory to notice another man, to feel anything that might be the first stirring of attraction. She told herself it was only natural, the result of proximity and loneliness. She tried to maintain a careful emotional distance, focusing on the work and nothing more. But the heart, Sarah discovered, was not easily governed by the will. One morning in late October, Sarah woke to find the world transformed by the season's first snow. It had fallen silently during the night, covering everything in a blanket of white that reflected the dawn light in shades of pink and gold. She stood outside the tent, wrapped in her shawl, and watched Robert emerge from the house, his breath pluming in the cold air. "Winter is coming," he said unnecessarily, walking over to join her. "We need to finish closing in the house. The tent will not be adequate much longer." Sarah nodded, though she felt a flutter of uncertainty. The tent had provided a clear physical separation between them, a propriety that could not be questioned. If they were both to shelter in the house, even with separate rooms, it would be different. People might talk if anyone knew, though out here, miles from town, there was no one to see or gossip. As if reading her thoughts, Robert said, "I will finish your room first, make it secure and private. There will be a proper door with a lock. I give you my word you will be safe." "I know," Sarah said, and realized she meant it. In the 6 weeks she had known Robert Irving, he had never given her cause to doubt his honor. "I am not worried about that." "What are you worried about?" The question was gentle, inviting but not demanding an answer. Sarah considered deflecting but found she wanted to be honest. "I am worried about forgetting," she said quietly. "About Thomas. About what we had. It has only been 5 months since he died, but already there are moments when I have trouble recalling his exact voice or the way he laughed. I feel as though I am losing him again, piece by piece." Robert was silent for a long moment, his eyes on the snow-covered landscape. When he spoke, his words were careful. "My father died when I was 15. It has been 13 years, and there are things about him I cannot remember no matter how hard I try. But the important things remain. The way he made me feel safe. The lessons he taught me, the kind of man he was, those things do not fade. How do you bear it, the forgetting?" "By remembering that love does not require perfect memory. Your husband lives on in the person you became because of him, in the lessons he taught you, in the love he showed you. That does not disappear just because details blur with time." Sarah felt tears on her cheeks, freezing in the cold air. Robert did not try to comfort her physically, respecting the boundaries between them, but his presence was itself a comfort. "Thank you," she whispered. "For what?" "For understanding. For not telling me it will get better, or that time heals all wounds, or any of the other useless things people say." Robert's smile was sad. "I learned long ago that grief is not a problem to be solved. It is simply something to be carried. Some days it is lighter, some days heavier, but it never fully goes away. We just get stronger at bearing the weight." They stood together in the snow-brightened morning, two people who had known loss and were learning to live despite it. Something unspoken passed between them, an acknowledgement of shared understanding. Sarah felt it settle around her heart, not erasing her grief for Thomas but existing alongside it, a separate thing entirely. The work of winterizing the house became urgent. They labored from dawn to dusk, racing against the weather. Robert worked on Sarah's room first, as promised, installing a proper door with a lock, building a bed frame and a small dresser, even hanging curtains he had purchased in town during his last supply run. The curtains were plain but well made, and Sarah felt her throat tighten at the thoughtfulness of the gesture. Her room was small but comfortable, with a window facing east to catch the morning light. Robert installed a small stove so she could have heat independent from the main room, ensuring her privacy and comfort. When it was finished, he showed her in with obvious pride in his workmanship. "Will it do?" he asked. Sarah ran her hand along the smooth wood of the dresser, noting the care he had taken with every detail. "It is wonderful, better than I expected. You have earned it. I could not have made the progress I have without your help. This ranch is as much your work as mine now." The statement pleased her more than she wanted to admit. She had spent her marriage supporting Thomas's dreams, which had been right and good, but she had never felt like an equal partner in the way Robert made her feel. He sought her opinions, valued her contributions, and gave her credit for her work. It was intoxicating, this sense of being seen and valued not for potential domesticity, but for actual capability. By mid-November, both the house and the partially completed bunkhouse were weathertight enough to provide shelter through the winter. Robert had his own room at the opposite end of the house from Sarah's, with the main living area and kitchen between them. The arrangement was proper and allowed them each privacy while sharing warmth and resources. Living in close quarters revealed new dimensions to both of them. Sarah discovered that Robert sang while he worked, old Irish songs in a language she did not understand, but that sounded beautiful nonetheless. She learned that he had a dry sense of humor that emerged in unexpected moments, making her laugh when she least expected it. She saw his patience when tasks went wrong, his willingness to redo work that did not meet his standards, his careful stewardship of their resources. Robert, in turn, saw Sarah's strength and resilience. He watched her adapt to each new challenge without complaint, learning skills she had never practiced before. He heard her singing, too, old hymns her mother had taught her, her voice sweet and true. He noticed how she made their rough house into something approaching a home, adding small touches that brought comfort, arranging their limited possessions to maximum effect, cooking meals that turned basic ingredients into something satisfying. He tried not to notice how beautiful she was, how the lamplight caught in her dark blonde hair at night, how her gray eyes seemed to see more than most people's. He tried not to think about the way his heart lifted when he heard her voice, or how the house felt empty on the rare occasions when she went to town, and he stayed behind. He told himself that she was his employee, that she was grieving, that any feelings he developed were inappropriate and unwelcome. But the heart, as Sarah had learned, did not easily obey the will. December brought heavy snows that isolated them from town for days at a time. They fell into comfortable routines, working on indoor tasks when the weather was too severe for outdoor labor. Robert built furniture while Sarah sewed curtains and linens, making supplies they would need when the ranch was fully operational. They cooked together, falling into an easy rhythm in the kitchen. They talked for hours in the evenings, sharing stories of their pasts, their hopes for the future, their observations about the world. Sarah told Robert about her childhood, growing up in a rough mining camp before her parents moved to Wyoming seeking better opportunities. She spoke of the fever that had taken them when she was 16, leaving her alone and working as a hired girl for various families until she met Thomas. She talked about her marriage, painting a picture of genuine love even as she acknowledged it had not been perfect. Thomas had been kind but sometimes distant, more in love with his dreams than with the daily reality of their life together. Robert shared his own history, the poverty of his Irish childhood, the difficult decision to leave his family, the years of hard labor on other men's ranches while he saved every penny. He spoke of loneliness, of being a foreigner in a land that often viewed the Irish with suspicion, of the slow accumulation of experiences that had shaped him. "You ever regret it?" Sarah asked one night. "Leaving Ireland? Sometimes I regret leaving my family. But I do not regret the leaving itself. In Ireland I would have been nothing, a laborer on someone else's land with no hope of advancement. Here I can be a landowner. I can build something. That opportunity is worth the cost. Even if the cost is loneliness." Robert met her eyes across the fire. "Loneliness is a high price," he admitted, "but perhaps not a permanent one. People can find each other, even in this vast place. Sometimes especially in this vast place, where there are fewer barriers and pretenses." Something in his tone made Sarah's heart quicken. She looked away, focusing on the sock she was mending. "I suppose that is true." They did not speak of it directly, the growing awareness between them. It felt too fragile, too new, and for Sarah, too complicated. She still wore her wedding ring, still thought of herself as Thomas's wife, even though Thomas was gone. The idea of loving someone else felt impossible, like learning to breathe water instead of air. But the feelings grew nonetheless, nurtured by proximity and shared purpose and genuine liking. Sarah found herself watching for Robert's smile, found herself thinking about him during the moments they were apart, found her pulse racing when their hands accidentally touched passing tools or dishes. She told herself it meant nothing, that it was only natural, but she knew she was lying. Christmas came, their first winter holiday together. They could not make it to town for church services due to the deep snow, so they created their own small celebration. Sarah cooked the best meal she could manage from their supplies, adding precious sugar and dried fruit to make a pudding that was almost festive. Robert had hidden away a small bottle of whiskey for the occasion, and they each had a small glass after dinner. "To the Irving Ranch," Robert said, raising his glass, "and to the partnership that is building it." "To new beginnings," Sarah added, clinking her glass against his. They sat by the fire, the whiskey warming them from the inside, and talked late into the night. The conversation drifted to more personal territory than usual, perhaps aided by the alcohol and the intimacy of the holiday. "You ever think about remarrying?" Robert asked, then immediately looked as though he wished he could recall the words. "Forgive me, that was too personal." But Sarah found she did not mind the question. "I do think about it," she said slowly. "Not in any specific way, but the abstract idea of it. I am 24 years old. I could live another 40 or 50 years if fortune favors me. That is a long time to be alone." She paused, gathering courage. "Do you think about marrying? You are building a ranch, a legacy. Most men want someone to share that with, to leave it to." "I think about it," Robert admitted. "I always assumed I would marry eventually, have children, build a family along with the ranch. But it is not easy to meet someone out here. Most of the unmarried women are already spoken for or not interested in the hard life a starting ranch would offer." He hesitated, then added, "I am also aware that I am not an easy man to know. I am too serious, too focused on work. Not many women would want that." "I do not think that is true," Sarah said softly. "You are serious, yes, but not cold. You are focused, but not obsessed. Any woman with sense would see that you are a good man, the kind who keeps his promises and honors his commitments. Those qualities are rarer and more valuable than charm." Robert looked at her with an intensity that made her breath catch. "You see me very clearly. You have let me see you clearly. That is a gift." They sat in charged silence, the air between them heavy with words unspoken. Sarah felt as though they were standing on the edge of something vast and terrifying, a precipice that once crossed could not be uncrossed. Part of her wanted to step back, to maintain the safe boundaries of their current relationship. But a larger part, growing larger by the day, wanted to leap. Robert broke the moment, standing and stretching. "It is late. We should get some sleep." Sarah nodded, relieved and disappointed in equal measure. "Good night, Robert." "Good night, Sarah." She lay awake in her room for a long time that night, staring at the ceiling and listening to the wind outside. Her wedding ring felt heavy on her finger, a constant reminder of vows made and a future lost. But for the first time since Thomas's death, she could imagine removing that ring, not as a betrayal but as an acknowledgement that life continued, that love might be possible again. The thought terrified and exhilarated her. January brought brutally cold weather that kept them inside for days at a stretch. The isolation intensified everything between them, every glance and word and moment of silence taking on significance. They were careful with each other, maintaining propriety even as the tension between them grew. Sarah knew they could not continue in this suspended state indefinitely. Something would have to give, some declaration would have to be made. But she was afraid of dishonoring Thomas's memory, afraid of making a mistake, afraid of the strength of her own feelings. The resolution came on a bitter February morning when Sarah woke feeling ill. She tried to push through it, making coffee and starting breakfast as usual, but her hands shook and her head pounded. Robert took one look at her face and ordered her back to bed. "I am fine," she protested weakly. "You are clearly not fine. Go rest. I can manage for a day." Sarah did not have the strength to argue. She retreated to her room and collapsed on the bed, pulling the quilts around her as chills racked her body. She drifted in and out of feverish sleep, losing track of time. When she woke fully, it was dark outside and Robert was sitting in a chair beside her bed, his face creased with worry. A cool cloth rested on her forehead, and she could see a basin of water on the small table beside him. "How long have I been asleep?" she asked, her voice hoarse. "Most of the day. Your fever broke about an hour ago. I was starting to worry I would need to try to get to town for the doctor despite the snow. You have been here the whole time. Where else would I be? You were ill. Someone needed to watch over you." Something in Sarah's chest cracked open. She had been alone when Thomas died, arriving home from town to find him already unconscious, living 3 agonizing days hoping he would wake before he finally slipped away. No one had sat vigil with her during that terrible time, and she had faced his death as she had faced so much of their marriage, alone with her thoughts and fears. But Robert had sat beside her bed, monitoring her fever, keeping watch. The simple care of it undid her. "Why are you crying?" Robert asked gently, reaching out to wipe a tear from her cheek. "I do not know," Sarah said, though she did know. She was crying for loneliness ended, for kindness received, for the terrifying relief of realizing she was not alone anymore. Robert started to pull his hand back, but Sarah caught it, holding his calloused palm against her cheek. "Robert," she whispered. "Sarah," he breathed back, and there was a world of feeling in the way he said her name. "I am afraid," she admitted. "Of what? Of this. Of what I am feeling. It has only been 7 months since Thomas died. I feel as though I am betraying him by caring for you." Robert was quiet for a long moment, his thumb stroking gently across her cheekbone. "I cannot speak to what is right or wrong. I know only that grief and love are not the same thing. You can mourn your husband and still deserve happiness. You can honor his memory and still build a new life. Is that what you want? For us to build a life together?" "Yes," Robert said simply. "I have wanted that for weeks now, but I did not want to push you. You needed time, and I was willing to wait. I am still willing to wait as long as you need." Sarah thought about time, how it moved forward relentlessly whether she was ready or not. She thought about Thomas and the love they had shared, real and true even if not perfect. She thought about how he had told her, in one of their last conversations before his death, that he wanted her to be happy, to have a full life, to not waste herself in mourning if anything happened to him. She had promised she would always love him, and that was a promise she could keep while also opening her heart to new love. The two things did not cancel each other out. The heart, she was learning, was far more capacious than she had imagined. "I do not want to wait," she said, meeting Robert's eyes. "I am frightened, but I am also certain. I care for you, Robert. I think I might love you. Is that possible, to fall in love again so soon?" "I do not know what is possible," Robert said, his voice rough with emotion. "But I know I love you. I have loved you for weeks. I love your strength and your honesty and your courage. I love the way you sing while you work and the way you see solutions to problems. I love how you have turned this house into a home. I love everything about you." He leaned forward slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wanted to. But Sarah did not want to pull away. She wanted this, wanted him, wanted the future they could build together. When his lips met hers, gentle and reverent, she felt something she had thought lost forever: hope. The kiss was tender, an exploration rather than a claiming. When they parted, both were smiling through tears. "I should let you rest," Robert said. "You are still recovering." "Stay," Sarah said. "Just sit with me a while longer." So Robert stayed, holding her hand as she drifted back to sleep, and Sarah felt safe in a way she had not since Thomas's death. Not safe from grief or hardship or the difficulties of frontier life, but safe in the knowledge that she would not face those things alone. The next weeks were a time of careful courtship despite their isolation. They had declared their feelings, but both wanted to honor the transition from employer and employee, from housemates to something more. Robert began small gestures of courtship, picking early flowers from the snow, bringing her tea in the morning, asking her opinion on matters large and small. Sarah reciprocated, mending his clothes with extra care, cooking his favorite meals, sitting closer to him during their evening conversations. By March, when the snow began to melt and the first hints of spring appeared, they had settled into an understanding. They would marry, though the timing was a matter of careful discussion. "I do not want people to think poorly of you," Robert said one evening. "If we marry too soon, there will be talk about propriety." "Let them talk," Sarah replied. "Anyone who knows me knows I have acted honorably. I do not care about the opinions of people who judge without understanding. Still, I would like to do this properly. Court you openly, give you an engagement ring, announce our intentions. You deserve that." Sarah was touched by his concern for her reputation, even as she knew it stemmed from his own sense of honor rather than any real worry about what people thought. "Then we will do it properly." "How long do you think is appropriate?" 3 months. "We could marry in June. That would give us the summer to prepare for next winter as a married couple, and it would be almost a year since your husband passed." "June," Sarah agreed. "That feels right." When the roads were passable again, they rode to Grass Valley together to make their intentions known. Sarah had been nervous about the trip, uncertain what kind of reception she would receive. Some people might judge her for moving on so quickly. Others might view her relationship with Robert with suspicion given how it had begun, but she had underestimated the pragmatism of frontier folk. Mrs. Chen, at the general store, embraced her warmly and wished her happiness. The pastor, when they met with him to arrange the wedding, spoke kindly about how grief need not preclude new joy. Even the few townspeople who might have harbored doubts kept them to themselves, perhaps recognizing that survival in Wyoming required flexibility in all things, including social conventions. Robert bought Sarah a ring, a simple gold band with a small garnet stone, and placed it on her finger in front of witnesses at the general store. It was not a large or expensive ring, but Sarah treasured it as a symbol of new beginnings. The weeks leading to the wedding were busy ones. Spring meant work exploding in all directions. Preparing fields for planting, planning for the cattle they would purchase after the wedding, finishing construction on the bunkhouse, repairing winter damage to structures and fences. Sarah and Robert worked side by side, but now with the knowledge that they were building their shared future rather than simply building a ranch. Sarah made peace with her past during those weeks, visiting Thomas's grave one last time before her new marriage. She had been worried it would be painful, but instead she found it healing. She talked to him as she had when he was alive, telling him about Robert, about the ranch, about the life she was building. "I hope you would approve," she said to the wooden cross that marked his resting place. "He is a good man, different from you but good in his own way. I will always love you, Thomas, but I am learning that I can love him too. Thank you for teaching me what love could be. That made it possible to recognize it again." The wind rustled through the grass, and Sarah chose to take it as benediction. The wedding took place on a warm June day in 1877, 9 months after Thomas's death, and 9 months after Sarah had first met Robert. They married in the small church in Grass Valley with perhaps 20 people in attendance, mostly townspeople who barely knew them but came out of community solidarity and curiosity in equal measure. Sarah wore her best dress, mended and cleaned until it looked almost new. Robert wore a new shirt he had purchased for the occasion and had trimmed his hair and beard. When they stood before the pastor and recited their vows, Sarah felt the rightness of it settle over her like grace. "I, Sarah Jensen, take you, Robert Irving, to be my lawfully wedded husband, to have and to hold from this day forward, for better or worse, for richer or poorer, in sickness and in health, to love and to cherish until death do us part. I, Robert Irving, take you, Sarah Jensen, to be my lawfully wedded wife, to have and to hold from this day forward, for better or worse, for richer or poorer, in sickness and in health, to love and to cherish until death do us part." When they kissed as husband and wife, Sarah felt tears on her cheeks, but they were tears of joy rather than sorrow. She had loved and lost, and now she was learning to love again. Both truths could exist together. The reception was simple, held at the boarding house with cake and coffee provided by Mrs. Chen. People offered congratulations and advice, told stories and shared laughter. As the afternoon wore into evening, Sarah and Robert slipped away, riding back to their ranch under a sky painted in shades of orange and pink. That night, in the house they had built together, they came together as husband and wife. Their lovemaking was tender and tentative at first, two people learning each other's rhythms and preferences. But beneath the hesitancy was genuine passion and deep affection. When Sarah lay in Robert's arms afterward, she felt complete in a way she had not expected to feel again. "I love you," she whispered into the darkness. "I love you," Robert replied, pressing a kiss to her forehead. "Thank you for taking a chance on me, on us. Thank you for seeing me when I needed to be seen." Life as a married couple settled into new rhythms. They were partners in every sense, working together to build the ranch and their life. Robert consulted Sarah on every major decision, valuing her judgment and insight. Sarah found fulfillment in the work, and in the knowledge that she was building something lasting. That July, they purchased their first cattle, 20 heifers and a bull, the foundation of what would become a substantial herd. Sarah proved to have a knack for managing livestock, gentle but firm in her handling of the animals. Together, she and Robert worked from dawn to dusk, exhausted but satisfied. By autumn, the ranch was thriving. They had hired 2 ranch hands to help with the increased workload, young men who lived in the now completed bunkhouse and worked for wages and experience. The main house was finished and comfortable, a real home rather than a construction site. The first harvest from their garden had been successful, and Sarah had preserved enough vegetables to see them through the winter. In late September, Sarah realized she had missed her monthly courses. At first, she tried not to hope, knowing that stress and hard work could delay such things. But when October came and went with no sign of her courses returning, she allowed herself to believe what her body was telling her. She told Robert one evening after the ranch hands had retired to the bunkhouse. They were sitting by the fire, reviewing accounts and planning for the spring. "Robert," she said, setting down her pen, "I need to tell you something." He looked up, immediately alert to the seriousness in her tone. "What is it?" "I am with child. I am almost certain of it." Robert's face went through a series of expressions: shock, joy, wonder, and concern. "Are you certain? Should we get the doctor to confirm?" "I am certain. I know my body." "The baby will come in the spring, late April or early May if my calculations are correct." Robert crossed to her, kneeling beside her chair and taking her hands in his. "How do you feel? Are you well? Do you need to stop working so hard?" Sarah laughed at his immediate protectiveness. "I feel well, better than I have in years, and I will not become an invalid just because I am pregnant. Women have babies while doing ranch work all the time. I will be sensible and ask for help when I need it, but I am strong and healthy." "A baby," Robert breathed, his hand moving to rest gently on her still flat stomach. "We are going to be parents. Are you pleased?" Pleased does not begin to describe it. I am overwhelmed, terrified, overjoyed, all of those things at once. Sarah understood exactly what he meant. She felt the same complicated swirl of emotions. Joy at the new life growing inside her, but also grief that Thomas would never know his child had he been the father. Excitement for the future, but also fear of all that could go wrong. Hope mixed with anxiety in equal measure. "We will figure it out together," she said, taking Robert's face in her hands. "Whatever comes, we will face it together." The pregnancy progressed well through the winter. Sarah continued working as long as she was able, finally conceding to limit her activities only in the last months when her growing belly made certain tasks impossible. Robert was attentive without being overbearing, making sure she rested when needed but not treating her as fragile. In late April, as the snow was melting and the first green shoots were appearing, Sarah went into labor. Robert rode for the doctor, but the labor progressed quickly, and by the time he returned with the physician, Sarah had already delivered the baby with the help of Mrs. Chen, whom Robert had stopped to collect on his way through town. "You have a son," Mrs. Chen announced, holding up the squalling infant for Robert to see as he burst through the door. "A son." Robert approached slowly, awe written across his face as he looked at the tiny, red, perfect human being. Sarah, exhausted but smiling, held out her arms for the baby. "You want to hold him?" she asked Robert. With shaking hands, Robert took his son, cradling the infant against his chest. The baby quieted, apparently soothed by his father's steady heartbeat. Robert's eyes filled with tears. "He is perfect," he whispered. "Absolutely perfect. What should we name him?" Sarah had been thinking about this for months. "I would like to name him Thomas Robert Irving if you are agreeable, to honor both the past and the future." Robert looked at her, understanding the significance of the gesture. "Thomas Robert Irving," he repeated. "It is a strong name. He will have much to live up to." "He will have you to teach him," Sarah said. "That is all any child needs." The next years passed in a blur of activity and growth. Thomas, called Tommy by everyone, grew from infant to toddler to young boy. He had his mother's gray eyes and his father's dark hair, and he was equally at home helping in the house or following his father around the ranch. Sarah and Robert marveled at their son, at his curiosity and energy, and the fierce love they felt for him. The ranch grew too. The initial herd multiplied, and Robert's reputation for quality cattle and honest dealing spread through Wyoming and beyond. They hired more men, built more structures, acquired more land. The Irving Ranch became known as one of the most successful operations in the territory. When Tommy was 3, Sarah became pregnant again. This time she was more experienced with both pregnancy and ranch work, managing both with competent ease. In 1881, she delivered twin daughters, Rose and Ruth, who had their father's green eyes and their mother's blonde hair. Robert was besotted with his daughters, and Sarah often came upon him in the evenings with a twin on each knee, singing Irish lullabies or telling stories about the old country. Tommy took his role as big brother seriously, constantly wanting to help with his baby sisters. Life was not without hardships. There were harsh winters that took portions of the herd, years when beef prices dropped and money was tight, illnesses that frightened them, and the constant hard work that left them exhausted. But through it all, Sarah and Robert faced each challenge as they had promised, together. On their 10th wedding anniversary in 1887, Robert gave Sarah a gift. It was a small wooden box beautifully carved, and inside was a deed. "What is this?" Sarah asked, examining the official-looking document. "The ranch," Robert said. "Half ownership. It should have been this way from the beginning. You have built this place as much as I have. It is yours as much as mine." Sarah felt tears sting her eyes. Women rarely owned property, and for Robert to give her equal ownership of everything they had built was a profound statement of respect and love. "I do not know what to say." "Say you will continue building this life with me for another 50 years. 60, Sarah countered. "At least." They stood on the porch of their house, looking out over land they had transformed through sheer will and hard work. The valley was green and alive, cattle grazing peacefully by the creek. In the distance, they could hear Tommy calling to his sisters, his young voice carrying on the wind. "Do you ever think about how we met?" Sarah asked. "How strange it was that you came along exactly when you did, that you bought all those tools and offered me work." "I think about it often," Robert admitted. "I was not looking for an employee that day. I already had more work than I could manage alone. But when I saw you standing there trying so hard to be strong, I felt compelled to help. It was as though some force I do not understand guided me to that spot at that moment." "Fate," Sarah said. "Perhaps, or perhaps just luck. Either way, I am grateful for it." Sarah leaned against her husband, feeling his arm come around her shoulders. She thought about the journey that had brought her here, the grief and loss and difficult choices. She thought about Thomas, the first man she had loved, and how his death had seemed like the end of everything. But it had been a beginning too, though she could not have known it at the time. "I am grateful too," she said, "for all of it, the hard parts and the good parts. Everything that brought us here." "To here," Robert agreed, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. As the sun set over the Irving Ranch, painting the Wyoming sky in shades of gold and purple, Sarah reflected on the truth she had learned through living. That life was not a single story but many stories layered together, that love could come more than once, and that endings could also be beginnings if you were brave enough to keep moving forward. The years continued to unfold, each bringing its own joys and challenges. Tommy grew into a responsible young man, taking on more ranch duties as he aged. The twins, Rose and Ruth, were inseparable and equally comfortable helping with ranch work or learning the domestic skills Sarah taught them. In 1889, Sarah delivered another son, John, and in 1892, their youngest child, a daughter named Grace, completed their family. The Irving Ranch became a cornerstone of the community. Robert served on the territorial council, advocating for better roads and schools. Sarah organized the first women's group in Grass Valley, where women could share skills and support each other through the isolation and difficulties of frontier life. Their home became known for its hospitality, always open to travelers needing a meal or a place to rest. As Wyoming moved toward statehood in the 1890s, the Irvings were part of the transformation of the territory from wild frontier to established community. They watched as Grass Valley grew from a tiny settlement to a proper town with a school, a real doctor's office, multiple businesses, and even a telegraph line connecting them to the larger world. Through it all, Sarah and Robert's love deepened and matured. The passionate intensity of their early years mellowed into something steadier but no less profound. They knew each other completely, the good and the bad, the strengths and weaknesses. They had weathered storms together, celebrated triumphs together, raised children together, and built an empire together. On a summer evening in 1897, 20 years after their wedding, Sarah and Robert sat on the porch watching their children play in the yard. Tommy, now 20, was teaching 13-year-old John how to rope. The twins, 16, were practicing their target shooting under their brother's supervision. 8-year-old Grace was trying to catch fireflies in a jar. "We did well," Sarah said, watching her children with a mother's pride and worry. "We did very well," Robert agreed. He looked at his wife, seeing the silver threading through her blonde hair, the lines around her eyes from years of squinting against the sun, the capable strength in her hands. She was 52 now, and he thought her more beautiful than the day he had first seen her standing by that table of tools. "What are you thinking?" Sarah asked, catching his gaze. "I am thinking about how lucky I am. How easily things could have been different. What if I had ridden past that day? What if I had not stopped? What if you had said no to my offer? But you did stop, and I did not say no. That is what matters. Still, it makes me grateful. We could have missed each other entirely, lived our whole lives without ever meeting. Instead, we got this." He gestured to the ranch, the children, the life they had created. "We got everything." Sarah reached for his hand, their fingers intertwining with the ease of long practice. "We got everything," she agreed. As the stars began to appear in the darkening sky and their children's laughter rang out across the valley, Sarah thought about the woman she had been 21 years ago, desperate and grieving, selling her dead husband's tools to pay her debts. That woman had been so certain her life was ending, so convinced that happiness was behind her forever. She had been wrong, and Sarah was profoundly grateful for that. Life had taught her that endings were rarely absolute, that loss could coexist with love, that the heart was capable of far more than she had ever imagined. Robert Irving had bought those tools all those years ago, but he had given her so much more: partnership, respect, love, family, and a future. In return, she had given him the same, and together they had built something that would outlast them both. Their children would inherit the ranch, but more importantly, they would inherit the lesson their parents had lived. That life required courage, that love required work, and that second chances, when seized with both hands, could lead to extraordinary things. As the night deepened and the fireflies danced in the warm air, Sarah and Robert sat together in companionable silence. Two people who had found each other against all odds and built a love story worth living. The Irving Ranch would continue long after they were gone, a testament to their vision and dedication. But their true legacy was simpler and more profound. They had loved well, raised their children with care, and proven that new beginnings were possible even in the wake of loss. The wild Wyoming wind whispered through the cottonwoods, carrying with it the promise of tomorrow and the memory of all their yesterdays. And Sarah Jensen, Irving closed her eyes and smiled, completely content with the life she had lived and the love she had found.